model in which there is reliance purely on donations from individuals. That's really where it is that a bill of this sort should go. If that's been identified, well articulated, it's out there, everyone knows it. Another point, of course, is that this bill makes no distinction between funding for political parties in election years and funding for political parties in years between elections. And I suggest that there's an important difference. I suggest that people are much more likely to be engaged in thinking about contributions to political parties in election years than they are in the years in between. And it is one of the flaws of this bill that it doesn't really think in this way. It slides over that point. It seems to assume that one year is much like another when it comes to party expenses. But that, of course, is not true. It's simply not true. Another flaw identified by a number of speakers is that this bill does not extend to holding accountable in any way candidates for the leadership of their party. Even though this bill begins to deal with the internal finances of political parties, it doesn't take that extra step which is so crucial. That is giving the public detailed information about what the people who come forward seeking to be elected as the leaders of the party and, by implication, asking to be elected as the Premier of the province. It doesn't give us the details, it doesn't give the public the details about whose pocket they might be in. Very important questions. Serious questions. That's where transparency and accountability should come in. And we can do it through legislation. It's not in this bill. No indication from the government that they're thinking of doing that. None at all. Another point, of course, is that the limits, the dollar limits on contributions are simply high. At $5,000, that's a big amount. Now, what that means is that the deeper the pockets of a contributor, the more likely they are to be able to contribute at that higher level. And the more beholden a leadership candidate, an individual member, or a party is going to be to those with deeper pockets. That shouldn't be. There are a lot of people out there who are interested in making small contributions to political parties. They might want to give 10 or 20 or 50 or $100. They might be able to go a little higher. But they're going to be outweighed in terms of the influence and attention that they can garner through their financial participation in supporting political parties by those who can give $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 contributions. Which leads to another point that's been identified, which is that this bill is fundamentally self-serving. It's fundamentally self-serving for the government to continue corporate donations, to continue donations at a $5,000 level, and to bless the third party with some cloak of legality for their trust funds. Well, you know what? Each and every one of those points has been worked over, I think, here in the House. Now, I do want to say a few more things about each of them, but I want now to flag two things that I think have not yet been commented on. One is the question of whether there should even be public financing of political parties except as a temporary transition measure. And the other is whether this bill violates the Charter of Rights. Now, I think that there is a portion to deal with the last issue of this bill. In fact, the core part of this bill, Clause 7, the new proposed Section 21A of the Act, that is highly problematic when it comes to the Charter of Rights, and I'll explain why in a minute. Let me just go back to that previous point. Should there even be public financing of political parties except as a temporary transitional measure from one system of financing to another? Now, I'm aware that it has become the style across Canada for political parties to take taxpayers' dollars and use them for their own purposes. This is triggered usually by the number of votes a party obtains. What's the rationale for that? The rationale, it is usually argued, is that it moves political parties out of the sphere of influence of the private sector, out of the sphere of influence of those with deep pockets. If there's a neutral basis, it's said, it's suggested, then this becomes a fair, equitable system. But you know what? I have hesitations about this. It's not clear to me that taxpayers' dollars ought to be used for this purpose at all, except perhaps as a temporary transition to a new system. Because clearly, if there were a different system, one that relied, for example, as we've been suggesting, purely upon contributions from individuals, and at a relatively low level of a cap, say $1,000, then it would clearly take some political parties some time to gear themselves up, to change their fundraising methods, and to begin to make sure that they have their apparatus in place in order to target purely individuals and to live on relatively small donations and nothing more. No corporate donations, no union donations, no big donations, big dollar donations from anybody. Smallish amounts. Clearly a transition period, a couple of years might be appropriate, and the political parties could bring themselves into line. It would mean a much more democratic system. It would mean that political parties would have to go out there and convince people not just to vote for them, but to give them a little money. Now, we do that already, and I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying that this would be a fundamentally simple thing to do. But with some transition money from the public purse, it's achievable. What it would mean is that political parties would really have to orient themselves towards going out and talking to individuals door to door, expanding their memberships, putting more people on PAC, that is pre-authorized checking systems, looking to really find people who are prepared to demonstrate that they will support a political party and not just with tax dollars, which they will have no choice about if this bill goes through. A mechanism will be put in place, it'll continue, it'll be automatic, it's easy, but it's not something that promotes involvement in the political process. So I have to say, I have serious, serious doubts about whether such a system makes sense at all. I know others have different views. I know others think that this indeed is part or can be part of an array of tools that makes for transparency, makes for independence. Well, I happen not to be convinced, but we'll see. What I predict is that at the federal level, in the provinces, perhaps this one, where such a system of public financing is adopted, after some years, maybe a decade or so, it may be that people will change their minds about this and decide to experiment with a different system, one that relies exclusively on donations from individuals and at a low level rather than public financing. I have to say that the initiative for that probably won't come from political parties. The initiative for that will probably come from voters. And it will probably happen if they find that the parties continue to be non-responsive to public concerns. They will begin asking themselves, why are we paying these parties if they're not responsive to public concerns? Well, let's go back and look at that overall list of things that are fundamentally wrong with this bill. Of course, I want to spend most of my time talking about the Charter of Rights problem because it's a novel one. That is, the issue is novel so far as our debate in this House is concerned. But I do want to go back and look at the particular items that have been identified as being fundamental flaws with this bill. Now, I started with the fact that we're even dealing with it on a basis of haste. Question becomes, of what priority is something like Bill 117? Is it so necessary? Is it so pressing that it has to be our focus for our unprecedented January sitting in the legislature? I don't think so. Are we so comfortable with the state of the economy? Are we so comfortable, particularly with the state of the economy in rural areas? Are we so comfortable with the protections for the environment? Are we so comfortable with issues around workplace safety? Are we so comfortable with issues around poverty and homelessness that we can turn our minds day after day to this bill? Why does the government think this is such a high priority? Well, the answer is that it serves them, but it doesn't serve the people of Nova Scotia. It has more to do with how the government thinks it might get itself reelected than it has to do with the day-to-day needs of regular, average Nova Scotians. And that's wrong, simply wrong. There was no necessity for this bill. There was no necessity for this bill to be forced upon us without a proper hearing at the Law Amendments Committee, without listening to the results of the Select Committee. What's the point even of having the Select Committee? You have to wonder if the bill is already going to have been adopted. And not only adopted, but in effect, retroactive to January 1st of this year. I mean, that's what the bill talks about. It's not legislation that is going to go into effect at some unspecified point far into the future. Retroactive to January 1st of 2007. Now that's a sense of urgency. That's the government looking to feather its nest preparatory to election. Not that there'll necessarily be one this year, but in a year or two, the government is being far-sighted with respect to its own interests, but not with respect to the interests of Nova Scotians in their day-to-day regular needs for the things that they need from their government: healthcare, education, protection on the job, protection of the environment, greater social equality. Those are the priorities of Nova Scotians. Well, I think this is evident. I think it'll be evident to Nova Scotians, and I think the government will pay a price for this. Not for this alone, because a continued bad sense of priorities is something that's cumulative on the consciousness of voters in Nova Scotia. One or two things they might forget, they might not worry about so much, But when it happens time after time after time, and they see that their government is not paying attention to the proper priorities, is feathering their own nests, is working for themselves rather than for the needs of Nova Scotians, that registers with voters. Well, let's turn to the trust funds. The history here is a shocking one. It's one that's well documented. It's one that's been scandalous. It's one that Nova Scotians know well. And the scandal is compounded by the government bringing forward legislation that tells the third party that they can keep this money. The third party tainted itself with respect to its activities, and now the government taints itself by giving its blessing to the continued use of those funds. Now, we know that we have heard comments from members of the third party in which they've suggested that there's nothing wrong with the money that they're holding on to. They suggest that there's been an audit. They suggest that everything's on the up and up. Simply not true. There was never an audit. The auditors said that they couldn't do an audit. And the court case, the trial, made it clear that there was an extensive toll gating system in place. Now, what I want to know is why we have not heard from any member of that caucus that is thinking of running for the leadership a clear position in which they renounce that money. What should happen to that money, in my view? The logical thing is that it should be forfeit to the public. It should be forfeit to the Crown. That's what should happen to that money. But no, apparently, and I suppose I have to correct myself, I think there is one member of that caucus who has spoken, who might be a leadership candidate, a member from Richmond. He suggested that it's just fine. He took offense at comments that were made during second reading. Suggested that all the steps that had been taken by the party internally cleansed the funds. Not in my view. But so far we've heard only from one candidate. There's wide speculation that there are at least two other members of that caucus who will be putting their names forward. Haven't heard from them. Haven't heard from them. There's speculation about whether some federal members might take a go at the leadership of the third party. And yesterday, apparently, there was an announcement from an unelected, that is, unpublicly elected member of that party from Colchester County saying he was going to run. Haven't heard from him, I don't think, about the trust funds. It's crucial that we hear about them from the members of that party. But what is wrong with Bill 117 is that it doesn't take this opportunity to wind up those funds and make them forfeit to the Crown. And for the government to give its blessing to the continued existence and use of those funds in the political process of Nova Scotia is simply wrong. I spoke earlier about fundamental flaws with this bill. That's a fundamental flaw with this bill. So we have progressed two items into the list. First, the sense of priorities. The second, the trust funds. Just wrong on both counts what the government has done here. Next point I raised was that this bill is essentially retroactive. This bill seeks to reward the parties based on how we all did in the 2006 election. Now, does that advance democracy? Does that say to other political parties out there, if you're interested in becoming part of the political process in Nova Scotia, if you have ideas that are worthwhile and useful, come forward with them. I mentioned that I'm not a big fan of public financing, but if public financing is going to be extended, if that's the new policy that the government has decided on, why is it that it thinks it can go back based on results of last year's election and start paying out based on that, rather than waiting, rather than saying to everyone, this will be a democratic process in the next election. There will be public funding available, depending on how you do. Why don't you run? If you have ideas that are worthwhile, perhaps the Green Party will get itself better organized. Perhaps the defunct Nova Scotia Party will come forward again in some form. Perhaps there's a natural resources party out there that'll come forward. Perhaps there's a rural party. Perhaps there'll be a Cape Breton party. Who knows what parties are out there that might want to come forward under a new scheme, okay? Well, it's said by government members that they can. Of course they can, but you know what? They'll be going up against parties that will have benefited by at least 1 year, perhaps 2 years, perhaps 3 years of public funding that is based on last year's election before those parties knew that there was a different scheme in place. Now, it's not my place to advocate for the Green Party or for the defunct Nova Scotia Party or for some hypothetical Cape Breton or rural or other kind of party. But you know what? I don't really like to be part of an electoral system in which I'm running for a party and the rules favor my party particularly and the established parties particularly more than the others. I think that taints all of us, and it's within our control. So I have a problem with the fact that this kicks in January 1st, 2007, rather than after the next provincial election. I think that's wrong. I think it's wrong in principle. I think it's one of the fundamental flaws of this bill. Now, one of the other fundamental points is that there's continued reliance on corporate and union donations. What that means, to put it that way, is that we would prefer to see pure reliance on individual donations. The pockets of corporations are deep. Pockets of unions are not so deep, but they're deeper than those of individuals. And although it's true that collective action is what unions are all about, it's also the case that we should be nudging ourselves away from, all parties should be nudging themselves away from reliance on group organizations. Now, I happen to think that a union is a much more democratic organization than many corporations. There are annual conventions, and there's a wide open opportunity for people to vote on resolutions, and they get to decide where the money goes. In most corporations, they're closely held. There are very few people who are in charge. Although there are board meetings, unless it's a very small company, the shareholders are widely dispersed, and it's really the board that gets to decide. It means that there's a small group of people that get to make the decisions in most instances. And we know that Canada as a nation is a nation of huge amount of corporate concentration. That means already that relatively few people own a lot of the major corporations, which means that in the guise of multiple corporations, they get to influence a lot of economic power already. To what extent should that economic power continue to be rolled out in the political process? We know that corporations are quite able to speak for themselves and do. They have PR agents, they have staff who can write letters, they can arrange meetings, they can talk. But when it comes to direct financial contributions, that gives them an added opportunity to exercise influence. And we've heard details about this. We've heard examples from many members of this party to illustrate what exactly is wrong with this and why it is that this too amounts to one of the fundamental flaws with this bill. I don't think I have to add to it. I wish simply to say I agree with the point that has been made any number of times by my colleagues about this. Next item is the high dollar limits. Again, I don't think I want to say a great deal about this because we've identified it already. $5,000 is simply too high a limit, and that, combined with the previous item, that is the continued reliance on corporate and union funds, means that this bill, in the end, is fundamentally a self-serving bill. Well, we know that. It's wrong. The public will understand it. The public does understand it. They've seen it. They'll continue to become profoundly cynical about the process that we're involved with if this House chooses to go ahead with a system that will be so fundamentally flawed. This tinkering with the system is not one which will, at its heart, make the system much more democratic, much more open, much more accountable, much fairer. Simply won't. Simply won't. Okay. Let's turn to the point which I think is completely novel in terms of the debate. This has to do with the charter issue. Now, I want to take a few minutes. Thank you. We lost the light for a minute. So I want to take a minute to explain this, and I'm going to table a court decision that I'm going to quote from in order to make this clear. Court decision is a decision from Ontario from this past October. The case is called Longley et al. Versus the Attorney General of Canada. It's a decision from the Ontario Superior Court of Justice. And the issue in that case had to do with the Canada Elections Act. The reason I turn to this, and the reason I turn to this case, is because, as I mentioned earlier, there is a core provision in this bill that has to do with how it is that parties will be financed out of the public purse in Nova Scotia. And I can illustrate how this will have some impact, some differential impact on some of the parties. Well, in fact, with one particular party. In this case, the party will be the Green Party in Nova Scotia. If we go back and look at what happened in the 2006 election. In the 2006 election, and I remind you, again, I don't regard myself as having a mandate to speak on behalf of that party, but their situation illustrates the difficulty here. And it illustrates why there very likely will be a lawsuit as a result of this legislation going forward, if it does go forward in the way in which it's drafted. And it's this. In the last election, in the last provincial election, which is the fundamental trigger for public financing, Green Party got 9,411 votes. That's total province-wide. Mr. Chair, I've been asked if I would allow an introduction. I will.
Thank you. The chair will now recognize the Minister of Natural Resources on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the member opposite for allowing me to do an introduction. We have some distinguished guests from the Valley this afternoon, and while I'm not able to name all of them, I would like to recognize some. My former colleague, Councillor Atwater, former warden, Carter, his wife, Mrs. Carter, friend and former retired farmer, Mr. Fuller, and some other gentlemen from the Valley. If they would please rise and accept the warm welcome in the House.
Thank you. The honourable member for Halifax-Shabukto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to continue. I was illustrating what I think is a problem, a legal problem at the heart of this bill. And I was using the case of the Green Party to illustrate it. The Green Party received 9,411 votes in the 2006 election. Under the proposed bill that we're considering, that party would get a choice. They would get a choice between taking $1.50 per vote or any other party. Anyone would get a choice. But there's a choice that's precluded for this party. The first situation they find themselves in is they could receive public financing for $1.50 per vote. So with 9,411 votes, they would qualify for something just over $14,000 per year in public financing. But that clause is written in an interesting way. It goes on to say that there's an alternative way to qualify for public financing. A party that gets more than 15% of the vote can choose to take 90 cents per vote plus $125,000 a year. Now, because the Green Party received no more than 2.3%, I think it is, of the total vote in the province, that's not a clause that's available to them. That's not a triggering mechanism that they can use. And the reason they can't use it is because of the percentage limit. The percentage limit is the hurdle that this bill erects. If that percentage limit were not there, of course, that party would qualify for over $133,000 a year, a difference of just under $120,000. Question becomes, what is the justification, if any, for putting the 15% hurdle in place? And is this legally problematic? Well, I'm going to explain that I think it is legally problematic and exactly why. I do this realizing that the government should have been aware of this. I know this was a case just decided in October, but as soon as we became aware of this case, a copy was delivered to the government. We made sure that they knew about it. They knew about it when we were dealing with this bill at second reading. And there's no change. There's been no change through the law amendments process. The government doesn't seem to have proposed any change in the funding formula as a result of knowing about the latest litigation. And I emphasize the latest litigation because it's not the only litigation that has to do with this kind of hurdle. Now, the litigation has focused so far on the Canada Elections Act. There are two main cases. One is known as the Figueroa case, and the other is the case that I just mentioned, the Longley versus Attorney General of Canada case. Now, here was the situation in the Longley case. Again, the legislation provided, as it does in the Canada Elections Act, for public financing of political parties. But there were also hurdles based on percentages. And the provisions in place under the Canada Elections Act said that a party to qualify for public financing would have to get at least 2% of the number of valid votes cast or 5% of the number of valid votes cast in the electoral districts in which the registered party endorsed a candidate. In other words, there were number hurdles. There were percentage hurdles that were built into the Act in order for a party to qualify for public financing. Now, in the Longley case, several political parties that ran candidates in the federal election, but whose results would not have triggered the public financing, went to court along with individuals, and they said that their charter rights and the charter rights of individual Canadian voters had been violated by these provisions of the Canada Elections Act. And they pointed to two sections of the Charter of Rights. They pointed to Section 3, and they pointed to Section 15. Section 3 of the Charter of Rights is a very simple section on its face. It's called Democratic Rights, and it reads as follows. Every citizen of Canada has the right to vote in an election of members of the House of Commons or of a legislative assembly, and to be qualified for membership therein. That's what it says. It's a very simple provision. And on the face of it, you would think that when it simply talks about citizens of Canada having the right to vote in an election, and note, of course, that it extends to legislative assemblies, the bill that we're talking about here that will affect us, you think it might have something just to do with voting, but it doesn't. It's much more expansive. The Supreme Court of Canada has told us in several cases that the right to vote doesn't just mean the right to go and mark your ballot. The right to vote, as it appears in the Charter of Rights, which is part of the Constitution of this country, means a much broader approach. It extends to things like the drawing of electoral boundaries. So the courts have engaged in an examination of electoral boundaries based on the provisions of Section 3 of the Charter of Rights. And in cases like Figueroa and in Longley, they have looked at party financing under that heading of Section 3. Here's what the judge said in the Longley case, quote, "The right to vote includes much more than the mere right to enter a voting booth and mark a ballot," end of quote. And the judge said that in that case based on Supreme Court of Canada precedent. Now, the Figueroa case, which was one of those precedents, involved what at that time was a 50-candidate threshold, which, if not met, would mean that a party could not issue tax receipts for donations received outside the election period. Based on Section 3 of the Charter, the political parties involved at the time were able to set that aside. So we know that Section 3 is a very broad-based section. It means a lot more than the bare right to go into a ballot box and cast your ballot. The court goes on to say, in interpreting the Supreme Court of Canada jurisprudence, quote, "The Section 3 right included the right of each citizen to play a meaningful role in the electoral process," end of quote. The court also noted, with respect to Figueroa, that, quote, "conferring financial benefits on parties that met the 50-candidate threshold as it then existed, but not to the others, had the following effects," end of quote. And they go on to expand on what those effects are. And here's what the Supreme Court of Canada said. They said that the 50-candidate threshold decreases the capacity of the members and supporters of the disadvantaged parties to introduce ideas and opinions into the open dialogue and debate that the electoral process engenders. That's a direct quote from Mr. Justice Iacobucci in the Supreme Court of Canada. Justice Iacobucci also said, quote, "Citizens must be able to assess the relative strengths and weaknesses of each party's platform. And in order to assess the relative strengths and weaknesses of each party, voters must have access to information about each candidate. As a consequence, legislation that exacerbates a pre-existing disparity in the capacity of the various political parties to communicate their positions to the general public is inconsistent with Section 3, end of quote. Justice Iacobucci goes further. He says, quote, "By derogating from the capacity of marginal or regional parties to represent their ideas and opinions to the general public, it undermines the right of each citizen to information that might influence the manner in which she or he exercises the right to vote," end of quote. Now, we have known, at least since the Figueroa decision, which is now several years old, that Section 3 is an expansive section. That is, Section 3 of the Charter is an expansive section. It was strong enough to strike down a 50-candidate threshold that existed at that time in the Canada Elections Act. That same section of the Charter of Rights was used again successfully in the Longley case in October to strike down those percentage triggers that I referred to in the Canada Elections Act that have to do with the qualifying of parties for public financing. That being the case, what are we doing including in our bill a percentage trigger that puts a differential position on regional or marginal parties when it comes to access to public financing? Why is that there? It has no business being there. It seems to me a flagrant violation of Section 3 of the Charter. Now, we all know that the way the Charter of Rights is written is that it offers certain guarantees to individuals, to members of the public. But those guarantees are limited. Section 1 of the Charter says, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in it, subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. So here's how charter litigation goes. If someone goes to court and they say, my charter rights have been violated, two things have to happen. There's sort of a two-stage process at the very least. The first is that the litigant has to show that their charter rights have been violated. Then the burden of proof shifts. If they're able to show that, the burden of proof then shifts to the government. The government then has to say, well, it's true, their charter rights have been violated, but you know what? We can justify the violation. It's necessary. We can justify it under Section 1 of the Charter because it is a reasonable limit prescribed by law and it can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. So the government gets a chance to justify what it's done. And the government tried to do that with respect to election financing and the differential treatment of political parties in Figueroa and also in the Longley case unsuccessfully. The Supreme Court of Canada has told us how it is that we assess, how it is that they, the courts, assess whether a Section 1 argument has successfully been made out. There was a Supreme Court of Canada decision known as Oakes. And the Oakes test is well known in Canada as setting out the process that a government has to go through in order to try and justify a violation of charter rights in legislation. First, they have to show that the objective of the law is pressing and substantial. Is there something pressing and substantial? Well, that argument was entirely unsuccessful in Figueroa and in Longley. They have to show that the law is rationally connected to those pressing and substantial objectives. And furthermore, they have to show that if they're violating the charter rights, they've done so to the minimum amount possible. And you know what? When the court in Ontario went through those aspects of the argument, they had no hesitation in finding that there was no Section 1 justification for these kinds of percentage differentials. So I commend the reading of this case to the government because I think they will find that they have stepped across a charter line and they ought not to do so. Now, I'm no fan of this legislation. I think there's serious problems with it. I'm not convinced we should be going forward with it at all, certainly not with respect to the numbers, with respect to the failure to take account of eliminating corporate and union donations, certainly not with respect to the dollar limits, certainly not with respect to the fact that it's partially retroactive rather than on a go-forward basis that announces the rules that will be in effect after the next election. I think all of those things are wrong, they're problematic, I think they undermine the democratic process. But here, if this bill is going to go forward, why do we want to buy a lawsuit? Why does the government want to buy a lawsuit along with all the other problems? Now, what is going to happen is that this particular provision is going to be challenged. Any parties that ran in the last election that are treated in a differential way, and presumably the prime candidate is going to be the Green Party of Nova Scotia, and individual voters who feel that their opportunities, as guaranteed by Section 3 of the Charter of Rights, to participate in the voting process, in the election process, in a full and fair way, have been infringed by this bill. They're going to whip us into court. They're going to take the government to court right away. And why do this? Why does this happen? I mean, this seems to me a fundamental flaw. Now, this is not the first time that I've given lectures in this House on constitutional law in Canada. And I offered a deal to the government a number of years ago. I would stop giving lectures on constitutional law if they would stop introducing bills that were unconstitutional. But for some reason, they've never taken me up on this. It just doesn't happen. I mean, it's not all that hard. I mean, this is a standard filter that should be gone through when the government is thinking about legislation. Is this bill constitutional? Does it meet the appropriate division of powers provisions of the Constitution Act of Canada, or might it also violate the Charter of Rights in some form? Clearly, someone has not been asking themselves the right questions, and if they did ask themselves the right questions, they didn't get the right answer. So I just find it incredible that this continues to be the case. Now, I think this is easy enough to amend and change. It's easy enough simply to take out the offending clause, to amend the offending clause, and to bring it into conformity with what it is that the Charter and the Charter litigation that has already conveniently taken place at the Supreme Court of Canada and in Ontario tells us is the result. So I asked the government to think, I asked them again, because we asked them in the fall by delivering a copy of this decision. So I asked the government again to think about amending this bill, which is not all that difficult to do, to take account of it. I mean, we have problems with this bill, don't like it, there are lots of reasons to vote against it. Can't think why I would do that, but if that amendment came forward, I would vote for that amendment, I have to tell you. So that said, Mr. Chair, thank you. I'm sorry to have missed out on the opportunity to speak on this bill at second reading, but I hope I've made up for it now. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member from Pictou.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to have to keep reminding myself that we are, in fact, in committee, because I probably will, on occasion, refer to you as Mr. Speaker. But I will try my best to do that. I, too, am disappointed that I didn't have the opportunity to speak when this bill was before the House earlier. However, I am very pleased to rise in this historic House of Assembly to try to make this a better, cleaner, more progressive, less conservative bill, and one without undue liberal influence. Now, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, we, in fact, were told by someone a while back that we could earn our spurs in relationship to the newer members in this bill by having to speak for long periods in this, and I think perhaps it's a member still sitting back here who said that at one point. Anyhow, to earn spurs in the Wild West, one had to deal with a lot of cowboys, and I certainly, Mr. Chair, would not refer to anyone in this House as a cowboy, or even worse, Mr. Chair, a cowgirl. But we do have to deal on this bill with a group of individual members, the members opposite and the members adjacent, And on this bill, it's hard to tell, you know, members adjacent, members opposite. Sometimes it's difficult to figure out the mix. Mr. Speaker, I was coming over here with a group today, and that statue of Joe Howe is just so fixed and so stoic. But if I were a little on the superstitious side, I think there could have been a little wink or a smile there this morning, because I think Joseph Howe would be proud of what we're trying to do here today. I think Joseph Howe would be proud of our filibuster on this issue, because Howe tried to clean up politics in Nova Scotia. He tried to lessen the power of the elite, and we in the official opposition are doing the same. We want to have less undue influence. Howe was certainly the fighter for freedom of the press, and I don't want to think that any of us can ever hope to be in the category of a Joseph Howe. However, we do have issues here that we do want freedom. And we want freedom from ill-gotten gain, and we want freedom from that influence that is so paramount in politics in Nova Scotia today. Mr. Chairman, I believe that Bill 117 it's a bill in disguise. It's projected to clean, but I believe that it is designed to whitewash. Good point again. I think we want to make fundamental changes in this bill. We want to ensure that there are no labor donations, that there are no union donations, and that there are no corporate donations. Let individuals be the supporters of the parties, and let's rid ourselves of the shackles of influence. In November, the NDP was looking for a 6-month hoist to Bill 117 and to finally bring an end to the Liberals' 6-year heist, the 6-year heist that took place years ago, but still has ramifications in a $3.4 million trust fund that still exists. Once and for all, it is time to make that Liberal dirty money clean. And what a good time for the Liberals, with a leadership campaign beginning this week to say that we don't want any money that may have come from a 25-cent a quart kickback. You know, there are three possible candidates out of the 9 members in the third party. What an opportunity for one of them, or for the mayor of Colchester County, if he comes into the fray, to say goodbye to the stigma of using money that appears or appeared to be tainted. You know, when I think of the Liberals and I think of the Conservatives, I have this picture in my mind of the Liberals almost being like dentists, and the Conservatives over there, a lot of people with bad teeth. And you know, the extraction process that we have here, you know, it's a picture that keeps coming into my mind of the acting the acting leader of the third party, hauling out those teeth in the process of extraction. You know, to think, Mr. Chairman, that we have been called into a January sitting to deal with Bill 117 with all the other matters that face Nova Scotians. Last night, there was an emergency debate forced by the opposition on the pork industry. And today, we are back to the pork barrel. We are back to the pork barrel. You know, what do we tell the pork producers? What do we tell the farmers who were outside just minutes ago? What do we tell them? Do we tell them that Bill 117 is the most important bill that we could possibly be dealing with? Do we tell them it's the most important bill that we could possibly have before us? It's the most important issue that there is in the province of Nova Scotia? Now, who has the guts? Who has the guts? And I use the term guts. Who has the guts to stand up and say that this is the most important issue before us? I don't think there is anyone capable and prepared enough to do that. The courage, the intestinal fortitude. I like my original word better, Mr. Chair. You know, I can't help but contrasting the current situation to the situation that existed in the Ham government when the leader of the NDP was discussing issues very intelligently with the Premier of the day, issues that were of paramount importance to Nova Scotia: protection of seniors' properties on entering care facilities. You know, and here we are in the current situation where deals are being made that are being designed to protect the coffers of two political parties. You know, I think the deal that used to exist, and, you know, far be it from an NDP member to lament the loss of Premier Ham, but I know him well, him being from Pictou County and all, and I can't help but look at the situation that existed in those days when there was a seeking to get air in the tires on certain important issues that were facing Nova Scotia and Nova Scotians. And today, we have the dialogues that are going on in relationship to this particular bill. We have to think beyond political parties. You know, I'm reminded of a song that, and I certainly would never want to sing it, but I'm reminded of a song, and it is called "Slow Down, Snowball, You're Going Too Fast." And this particular song, Mr. Chairman, the writer got his inspiration by seeing a woman out walking a dog, and the dog was too frisky and was pulling her along. And she was being pulled along down the street, and she kept saying, "Slow down, Snowball, you're going too fast." Well, Mr. Chairman, I say to the government House Leader that you have to slow down, Snowball. Slow down, Snowball. You're going too fast. And I say to the Premier, slow down, Snowball. You're going too fast. And I say to the leader of the Liberal Party, the acting leader of the Liberal Party, and his colleagues, that, he should forget about Snowball, but if he gets any closer to the Conservatives on Bill 117, I think he and the others will melt. Mr. Chairman, it's time to make Bill 117 right. And it's time to take the real time to consult Nova Scotians and, more importantly, move on to matters that mean more to Nova Scotia and less to the political parties. The Liberals and the Conservatives have teamed up on Bill 117. They're sort of in bed on this one together, cracker crumbs and all. And the Conservatives should have kicked them out and said enough is enough, but anyhow, they're still moving forward. But what a message to send to our youth. We say to them, don't do drugs and don't sell drugs and don't exploit others, but it's okay to use money that may have come from some kind of an extraction system and so on. So I think we really have to get our priorities right here in this province. I reflect back to November when we first started to debate Bill 117, and I remember some scouts being up in the gallery. The young men and young women with a motto, "Be prepared." And I'm just wondering if the Conservatives are really prepared on this issue and if the Liberals are really prepared. Because I'm inclined to think the answer is no and no. I think it's time to go back to the drawing board and do the right thing and make some real changes in this piece of legislation. I want to be able to tell the honest farmers in the East River Valley, the loggers in the Lorne area, and the fish harvesters down in Lismore, the cottagers in the Garden of Eden, the laid-off Trenton Works employees in my hometown of Westville and other Pictou County communities, the First Nations people at Pictou Landing, the residents of Thorburn, Kensieville, Riverton, Hopewell, and all the villages of Pictou East, that there are more important things to deal with than Bill 117, and that we are dealing with other matters. Mr. Chair, I was the guest speaker at a Legion banquet on November the 11th in Eureka, Pictou County, and I always feel a strong sense of thanks and appreciation for the service of our veterans. I come from a military family. I had several great uncles who saw a lot of action in World War I. I had two uncles in World War II, including my father's kid brother, 13 years his junior. Also had the name of Clary McKinnon. Came back from overseas after service in Italy and France and the Netherlands. Came back with a wounded body, a wounded mind, and a wounded soul, and he died in Camp Hill Hospital after many bouts in the hospital. He died in Camp Hill Hospital in 1968 at the age of 45. And I think it's important that if we can't clean up democracy for ourselves and future generations, let's do it for our veterans, for those who made it possible for members of these three parties in this House to freely debate these issues. To debate these issues, to debate issues like Bill 117. You know, old ways die hard, but why crawl on reform when we can walk proudly with our heads held high? We have made progress, and there are some good measures in Bill 117, but it can be much better, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to reflect back to the way the political system worked when I first got involved in it. And some people may be concerned about what I have to say in relationship to this particular matter, but it is a personal reflection. And I remember many, many years ago when I was the youngest poll chair in the province for the Liberal Party. I remember being given 48 Mickeys of rum to run my poll. And Mr. Chair, when I returned 45 of those after 12 hours of working the poll, I was told that I was going to ruin the system. You're going to ruin the system. And some may ask what happened to the other three. But anyhow, there were some old folks that were treated after they voted, long after they voted that particular day, but none of them were used for votes. And I don't think we ever want to return to any kind of situation that even hints of anything like that. It's time for us to move beyond all of these things. You know, when we look at the corporate donations, 51% of the Conservatives' money in 2005 came from corporate donations. I'm surprised that 59% of the money that the Liberals gained was from corporations, and the NDP got 13% of its donations from unions. I think we have to look at the individual donations, the small donations that people feel they can really make a difference with. And I can't help but thinking of the Molly campaign. The Molly campaign that Dalhousie University Medical Research Foundation has each year. And Molly Moore was a cleaner. Molly Moore was a cleaner who donated $5 or $10 or $15 or $20, whatever she could come up with, she donated it to medical research. And Molly not only donated money of her own, but she solicited others for small donations as well. She actually went through nursing homes, and she really sought out small donations to help out in what she believed to be a great cause. And today we have the Molly campaign every year, and it raises mega dollars. I'm not sure of the amount, and I wouldn't want to venture even a guess. But you know, Molly Moore was a cleaner, and we as MLAs have an opportunity today to be cleaners as well. And I think we can clean up this. I think we can clean up this particular piece of legislation. You know, with this bill, I think we need more people to have input in it. And as was stated earlier, to have law amendments over the holiday season was a very unfair situation. And someone said a while back, a number of weeks ago, that this bill needed quite a little bit of tweaking. And I believe that it needs a lot more than tweaking. I really believe that it needs to be twisted and turned, and we have to have an engagement of the people in the process. The Chronicle Herald, at one point in a column, referred to it as being riddled with holes. Riddled with holes. Why should we support something that is riddled with holes? You know, during the election campaign, and I guess I've sought public office on 7 occasions, and I've heard this quite often. Why should I vote? And someone talked about it, a previous speaker was referring to where we are as politicians on the scale of trust. And every once in a while, when you knock on the doors, when you're in the midst of an election campaign, politicians are referred to as, oh, you're a bunch of crooks. And if you're not a crook, you will be. And I hate to hear that on the doorsteps. It's really so disturbing. And I think we have an opportunity to really do something here. You know, the lawyers are trusted more than politicians. Used car salespeople are trusted more than politicians, and so on. I think we have to change that. You know, there's a situation here that there's a book that's called Bagman, A Life in Nova Scotia Politics. And it was written by a political insider, Donald F. Ripley. And I've had a copy of that book for a long, long time. And in fact, the member for Pictou West borrowed it from me a number of months ago, and I'm just recalling that I better get that one back from him at some point. But the importance of this bill, you know, the House met for 38 days last year. 38 days last year. And here we are looking at 5 or 10 days in 2007 on Bill 117. What kind of a record are we going to have in 2007? You know, the real issues that we are dealing with. I am having community office days every Thursday on a rotating basis, and I've taken our office on the road to rural communities week after week after week. And this has brought democracy to over 300 people. Over 300 people have been able to come out and express their concerns without going far from their own communities. And not one of them has talked about Bill 117. Not a person has talked about it. I was asked by a reporter, what are your top 2 priorities for 2007? I didn't say one of them is Bill 117. That's for sure. What have you accomplished since the provincial election? I didn't say, oh, I was going to debate Bill 117. What would you like to tell your constituents in 50 words or less? Certainly, I don't want to tell them that Bill 117 is one of the major accomplishments that we have. You know, the real issues out there are things like out-migration, lost opportunities, the lack of a real rural economic development strategy. You know, those are the types of issues that we're dealing with out there. This bill is very low on the totem pole issues in Nova Scotia. You know, roads and bridge infrastructure are very, very key to the people in my constituency. I have 473 case files, and this is besides the 300 and some who have come out to the office days that we're having and so on. And not one file relates in any way to party finances. Not one person is concerned about it. I've even done some door-to-dooring since the election. I do that on occasion. Just go out and talk to some people door to door. Nobody's talking about Bill 117. Not a person is talking about it at all.
Order, please. Order, please. Just a few too many private conversations among the members in the chamber. Appreciate it if you'd take them outside, please. The member for Pictou East has the floor. The member has until 1:47.
1:47.
Correct.
Thank you very much. Oh, this is, we're just getting warmed up here, Mr. Chair. You know, I even believe that the chocolate milk that I'm drinking here is more important than Bill 117. You know, the plight of the farmers is more important than this bill. Almost anything that we can come up with is more important than Bill 117. No, we are dealing with the problems of farmers. We have fish harvesters that have severe problems. We have the logging industry that is undergoing severe problems. I just a few minutes ago received a note from my constituency assistant, and with the kind of weather that we are getting out here and other complications, we have a situation that in Pictou East, this is a mill just outside of my hometown of Westville. We have a situation where the company cannot get any hardwood to process because of the state of the weather, and also because of deals that aren't coming through with Stora Enso. And here's an issue that I believe is really, really important. And it's an issue that we're looking at taking about 30 families. 30 families are going to be affected from this particular mill within the next couple of weeks. And here we are discussing Bill 117 when there are situations like this that are out there. And looking back on 2006, Stora committed to 9,000 tons of hardwood for the Savoy Group, and they ended up getting 3,800 tons. And this was a plant that was looking at expansion. And now we are in a situation where there's going to be layoffs within the next couple of weeks for sure. I looked up into the gallery when I started to speak a while back, and I saw Frank Fraser there. Frank Fraser is the former mayor of Mulgrave, the former mayor of Canso, I'm sorry, former mayor of Canso. And I just wonder what the people of Canso, with all the out-migration that has taken place there, what they are actually thinking about in relationship to Bill 117. I would place bets that the people of Canso are not very concerned about Bill 117. Now, the out-migration, I believe to be an issue that has to be addressed, and it has so many pieces of legislation that could be tied to it. And I probably have said in the House before that 7 years ago, I had the occasion of 7 years ago in February, I had the occasion of working in Cape Breton for a period of time, a period of years, and I used to say to my wife, look at the demographics of the people in Sobeys, the people in Superstore, and the next time we're visiting our children in Metro, next time we're visiting our children in Metro, let's compare the demographics. And when you look at the number of children that are in the carts, the supermarket carts in Cape Breton, when you look at them in New Glasgow, you can almost see the progression of older people in the demographics in Cape Breton, somewhat improved in New Glasgow, and greater improvement in the Halifax area. Of course, vast improvement in the Halifax area. So those are the issues that the people of Pictou East and elsewhere are concerned about, and not Bill 117. And I want to be able to go back to these people in Pictou East and tell them of real progress, of bills that we're dealing with that have fundamental importance to the people of Nova Scotia. Now, for a few moments, I want to actually look at the figures that are involved in relationship to the 2005 campaign sources of income. And for the NDP got 12.8%. No, I'm sorry, the 2005 fundraising. Sorry, 2005 is the level of fundraising that I'm dealing with here. 12.8% of the contributions to the NDP came from unions. And what we're looking at is a situation where 4.1% came from businesses, and from individuals, 83.1%. We look at the Conservatives. Let's look at the Conservatives for a moment. Well, the figures that I have are 2005, and I'm very comfortable in the researcher that came up with this information, because I think we have among the best researchers there are. And we look at the Conservative figures, and we're looking at 50.9% from unions, 0%, but 50.9% from businesses, and 49.1% from individuals, 49.1% from individuals. And the Liberals, according to the figures that I have, union donations, 0. Businesses, 58.8%, 58.8%, and individuals, 41.2%. So you can see that the designs here, as the legislation stood when it first came in, this legislation benefits the Conservatives most. They receive the largest number of $1,000 to $5,000 donations. In fact, according to the figures I have, and I believe them to be very, very accurate, the Conservatives received 130 donations in that particular corridor, in that particular bracket. The Liberals got 36, and the NDP got 26. So you can see that we are a party that gets its primary support from the average person, from the individuals. So when you add all these things up, Mr. Chair, you can see why the tag teaming has taken place between the Liberals and the Conservatives on this particular issue. So, Mr. Chairman, what I want to reiterate is that this is the time. This is the time for the Liberals to really come clean. It's a time, as I stated earlier, when the Liberal Party is going into a leadership campaign, and I think it's going to be a very interesting campaign because we have a number of possible aspirants involved there. And I'm sure we will follow that campaign with great interest. But I think we would follow it with greater interest if one of the contenders, at some point would say it's time to get rid of the trust fund. We have to encourage, Mr. Chairman, all of those that are seeking that office to examine that issue with an open mind, with an open heart, and with a real sense of fairness. And we have to look at the issue and in such a light that we're not just thinking about what we can extract from the system. The situation is that we have an opportunity to speak to this for an extended period of time, and no one really likes to do this. Mr. Speaker, I would much sooner be up here speaking on issues that are really of concern to me. I would like to be able to get wound up and fired up and really put my heart and soul into speaking before this House. But on this particular issue, it's almost easy to run out of steam. You know, I've been given an hour to speak on this issue. And if this issue were something that were really dear to my heart, I would have no problem speaking for that hour. You know, there would be no filler involved. There would be real seriousness about the situation. But here we are in a situation where we are engaged in trying to make some fundamental changes in something that is not the most significant thing to the people of Nova Scotia. And I hope that we do, in fact, have a lot more than 38 days in this legislature in 2007. I hope that the government is looking at doubling at least the number of hours. A lot of people don't realize the situation that you are in as an MLA. Some people have even said to me, so Clary, are you getting a rest now that the House isn't in session? You come back in November and somebody says to you, so are you getting a rest? You know, sometimes you come to Halifax and get the rest. People out there do not realize how much work an MLA actually does within the constituency. A good MLA is out there working all the time in the constituency, and sometimes you actually come to Halifax to get a rest. And you know, the member from Digby, I think, has a lot of good ideas when he says to you, you know, outside the House, you know, you don't really get votes in here. You know, you get your votes back in your constituency. And here we are in here dealing with Bill 117 when we could be back in our constituencies really doing something that means something positive to the people of Nova Scotia. You know, Bill 117. What kind of a legacy are we leaving to our constituents with this particular bill? I mean, I would dearly love to see us being able to call other bills, to bring other bills forward here and to deal with them, to be tied up with this going through clause by clause and speaking for an hour on title and so on. It's really time for us to reflect on what we're really doing in here. And on this side of the House, in this official opposition, we are doing what we believe is right in trying to make some changes in it. But why didn't we just go back and take 6 months to reflect on it? And I said in jest, you know, the song "Slow Down, Snowball, You're Going Too Fast," but that really kind of captures what is happening with this particular piece of legislation. So I'm going to take just a few moments to recap a couple of the points that were made. That it's time to make Bill 117 right. It is time to take some real weeks and months to consult Nova Scotians. It's a time to move on to more important matters that mean more to Nova Scotia. And Mr. Chair, I do want to go back to the feeling that this legislation is just riddled with holes, and you know, you could drive a truck through some of these situations that exist in here, and we're going to have a lot of time spent on amendments. I know that we are going to go clause by clause on this, and the House, by the time this week ends and perhaps next week, everyone's going to be pretty weary. with Bill 117. And I don't know why we can't just say it's time to move on. It's time to consult a bit more on it. And I know when you take something into the House, you have to table it, but I was on my way in here with a badge that said, "We need pork made in Nova Scotia." And to me, those issues, those farm-related issues are much more important than what we're doing here at this particular time. So tweak it, twist it, turn it, whatever you want to do with it. We have to engage this. We have to change it. We have to see that it's made right. We have to ensure that if this is the one shot that we do get at this bill, if this is the 1 week or 2 weeks that we get to deal with this bill, that we have to make it right. We have to make fundamental changes in it. But I think it would be a whole lot better if we had other people in Nova Scotia, the average person that actually doesn't care too much about it, but there are some people out there that would in fact come in if the time were at a more convenient time than just at Christmas. So I say in getting close to closing that, you know, we can't support something that is riddled with holes. We have to be able to go back to our people and really confidently say that we are working on the issues that really matter to Nova Scotia, that matter to all Nova Scotians. The couple that came into my office yesterday before I came up here and talked about out-migration, you know, they were really upset. They had a situation where a family member had left and they felt the family member was never going to return other than perhaps the odd vacation and so on, and really saying, you know, what is here for us? What is the government doing in inviting people to return to Nova Scotia when what opportunities are there here? And those are the things that we should be dealing with here today. Those are the things that really, really matter. Those are the things that we were elected to deal with. All 52 of us have been elected to deal with the real issues, not to deal with an issue that is primarily designed for the gain of two political parties. And that's where we are on this particular issue, Mr. Chairman. And if anyone else wants to borrow and just reflect on what used to happen in Nova Scotia, I certainly have a copy of the Bagman, A Life in Nova Scotia Politics, and boy, that can send shivers up your back on what used to happen in this province, and we hope that we move away from those kinds of things totally. So in recapping for the second or third time, I would like to say that one more time, I think, for a couple of the major points, you know, like slow down, snowball, you're going too fast, or something like that. You know, the real important things that I referred to earlier, I think, you know, we could actually deal with some of those for sure. But, you know, going back to Pictou East and what is of concern to the people there, you know, we talked last night for a little while about the 8%. I mentioned the figure 8% is the situation in relationship to our consumption of 8% is the beef that comes from Nova Scotia that we consume, and 92% is beef that comes from, generally speaking, Alberta. So as I said last night, we're not just producing our children for Western Canada, we're also sending a lot of money to Western Canada as well, and for pork from Manitoba and so on. So in Pictou East, I have a number of beef producers. And those beef producers, I can think of one that is trying to do a real good job with an excellent product, actually sell some of it roadside. And he is in the Plymouth area. I think of another one that is away out in Willowdale, who is trying to survive with all the situations. And that particular person was involved in lumbering and was affected by Stora and other matters that were important. So the situation is that, and a farmer down in the Lismore area, a beef farmer, recently contacted me, and when I talked to those people, and I do deal with them regularly. I've actually had a number of dealings with the beef producers, of Pictou County, and the members of the board of directors of that group. If I go back and say to the members of that board of directors, boy, I really accomplished something in Halifax. We put through Bill 117. They would say, what in the blank blank is Bill 117? And what does Bill 117 really mean to us? So, you know, it's really something else. I already talked about the pork producers, and certainly support their efforts, and some of them, I guess, were in the gallery at one point, and maybe some still are. But those are the issues that we have to be dealing with, and I just feel remiss to be in here making, trying to find words in relationship to a bill that doesn't mean that much to the general public and should be out there for more input, and rather than having it shoved through in the manner in which it is being shoved through this House at this particular time. So, old ways do in fact die hard. But as I said earlier, you know, why crawl toward reform when we can walk proudly with our heads held high? And I referred also in the very beginning, in relationship to Joseph Howe. And Joseph Howe, the impact that he had on Nova Scotia in cleaning up politics and in making the elite less important. And we, in fact, are honoring the elite with this particular bill. We are continuing to have input at a very high level from corporations and from unions. And this party wants to see that come to an end. And I really believe that none of us are here aspiring to be Joseph Howe's, for sure, particularly when someone is digging for words to fill in an hour. However,
You spoke for 6 hours and 15 minutes.
that's the point. That's the point. I mean, I wish we had Joseph Howe here in
Joe's here.
Yeah, I wish we had a Joseph Howe on this side of the house, but we do have people that come closer than we might find elsewhere. So I think, Mr. Speaker, that I have used up a fair bit of time, and I want to ensure that fundamental changes are in fact made, that there are no labor, no union donations, and no corporate donations. And let the individuals in this province support the parties, and as I said earlier, rid ourselves of the shackles of influence. The shackles of influence, and that's what we have. That's what we have in Bill 117, are the shackles of influence. So I hope, Mr. Chair, that we are, as new members, at least trying to earn our spurs a bit in relationship to this particular bill, and to try to have some positive input into the bill and into the system of the future. And I still believe in my heart of hearts that this is it's a bill in disguise. It is a bill that has been projected to clean, but it's designed to whitewash, and that's where I think I'm going to leave that in a few moments. And I believe my time, do I have about 2 more minutes that I could reiterate a couple more points? No, I really feel that I have to at least go out with something fairly strong. You know, yeah. Well, yeah. We need pork, not pork barrel. So let's move on from the pork barrel. Let's get away from that. Let's do more than tweak it. Let's see what we can do with this bill. Let's move on to more important issues. And with that, Mr. Chairman, let McKinnon sit down. Thank you.
Thank you. Shall Clause 1 carry? Carry. The honourable member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd ask, and I've spoken to the other 2 House leaders, with approval of the House, we have some amendments in Clause 4 that have incidental impact on Clause 2. So I'd ask that Clause 2 be stood for now, and then when we get to Clause 4, part of our amendments will include Clause 2, and we can deal with it then, if that's okay with the House.
Question before the committees, Clause 2 stand. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. All those against, motion carried. Shall Clause 3 carry? Carry. The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage on Clause 4.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our caucus wants to. We're going to have we have an amendment with regard to Clause 4 that I will start to distribute now. Can you make sure the House leaders each get one first, so it's on their desks before? Thank you. This is an amendment that I will speak to for a little while. And by a little while, I mean my little while, not what the former House Leader for the NDP used to call a little while. But also, there'll be some other speakers on this, and then we'll have a vote on it. And depending on the turnout of that one, what happens on that one, we may have other amendments to Clause 4. Mr. Speaker, this is an amendment in many ways. It's very simple. This Act, Bill 117, creates limits on individuals and organizations and how much they can donate in Nova Scotia to political parties. In itself, which seems fairly simple. What this amendment does, it eliminates the term organization. Therefore, what will be left in the Act if this amendment passes is only individuals can donate to political parties in Nova Scotia. So what does this amendment do? It would eliminate corporate and union donations in Nova Scotia. And with that simple amendment, we would revolutionize, I argue, politics in this province. As the as my colleague from Pictou East just said, it would remove the shackles of influence with regard to our political process. And what it can do, Mr. Speaker, is it will result in Nova Scotians having a system that would be at first harmonized as of January 1st with the federal system. And can I just say for the record, Mr. Speaker, that's a system that actually I think most of us are familiar with now. We have run 2 federal elections under the federal campaign finance system of 2004 and 2006. Probably have another one later this year, Mr. Speaker. But that is a system that I think most of us have now seen operate on an up-close basis, those of us who work provincially but also have a tendency from time to time to be involved in federal elections will know that the system federally has worked. At first, the federal system was meant to limit corporate union donations to $1,000, and I may note it was the Conservative Party in government last year as part of its Accountability Act that introduced an amendment to campaign financing federally that when it was passed and proclaimed by the Governor General in December, as of January 1st, 2007, corporate and union donations are now banned at the federal level. And I think that's a good thing. I think my party believes that's a good thing. That's something many in our party have been fighting for a long time. And Mr. Speaker, it has worked at the federal level. I've actually begun to see in my own party at the federal level changes as a result of banning or limiting corporate and union donations and the impact it has had on my party and on the political process generally. And if not for any other reason, if the other parties don't believe in the ideology that we should be banning corporate and union donations, which I would love to hear them stand up and tell us why that's the case, I would at least argue, Mr. Chair, that we are in a situation where we would be harmonizing with the federal rules. And on so many occasions in this House, I've heard many people from the Conservative Party, when they're in government, when the Liberal Party was in government, talk about harmonizing and the benefits of harmonizing. We have a bill before this House, which is the Canadian Nova Scotia Offshore Occupational Health and Safety Act, Mr. Chair, which we haven't called for, I think, 5 or 6 or 7 sittings. And when I've asked the House Leader, why don't we call it, he goes, it can't be called because we need to have harmonizing legislation at the federal parliament and in Newfoundland. So on a constant basis in this House, there's an overriding public policy theme that we believe there should be harmonized legislation across the country with the federal government where possible. Why? It makes good sense. You're going to have, I mean, there's only so many voters, as people like to say. There's only one taxpayer in Nova Scotia, even though there are 3 levels of government. We all have to pay taxes to all 3 levels. Well, it's one voter. It's one political activist that's involved, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair. And these political activists, in many cases, are involved at provincial elections, and many of those same people are involved at federal elections. Now, that my experience is with the NDP. I assume it's not that different with the Liberals or with the Tories, that they have people who work both elections. Official agents, people working on finances, people working on fundraising, have a tendency, if they're good at it, to work both federal and provincial elections for their political party. Well, Mr. Chair, if that's the case, then we are doing our political parties a benefit by recognizing the fact that we would have one political party, one system in place for the benefit of all involved. And if the federal system has accepted that we should ban corporate and union donations, then it's the perspective of our party that we should harmonize that provincially so the rules are the same, making it a benefit for all of them. Mr. Chair, we think that's a good idea, and if no other reason, on public policy basis, it's a good idea to ensure that we have a process that prevents confusion, that allows for 2 different systems. Let's have one system, harmonize it, make sure that the system is such that it is in the act that we have it harmonized. Now, I say that based on practical reasons. I also believe, Mr. Chair, that there are good ideological reasons why we should ban corporate and union donations. You know, Mr. Chair, I recall not that long ago, well, maybe it's getting long, I've been in this House almost 9 years. In 2000, this is an issue that was raised in my political party as part of a process of us going through a leadership race. And I remember at the time there were a lot of critics within my own party of a position that was taken by myself and many other people that we needed to ban corporate and union donations. And in fact, there were many in the party that were used that against me. I'll be frank about that. And I'm proud to say today, 7 years later, 6.5 years later, we're finally at a point where we now have my political party endorsing what I believe has been a solid concept for a number of years: ban corporate and union donations. There is no benefit that I can see that's derived from continuing to have the money that we receive from these organizations, because they are significant. It isn't about mom and pop showing up with a $25 check or showing up to work on a campaign. It's about the fact that you have large organizations that provide substantial amounts of money. Yes, there are tax benefits that come with that, and obviously some do it for tax purposes. But, Mr. Chair, I believe in many other cases the issues become one in which, if nothing else, the perception that they expect something in return. And, Mr. Chair, that is what we need to avoid. At a time, particularly today, particularly this week, when people are fairly disgruntled and disappointed, I think is a fair way to say, in their politicians, where they see that their politicians at times, that they hold up to a certain level of review, feel they're not meeting that level of review. Now is the time to pass legislation that shows the people of this province that Nova Scotians can understand that there will not be corporate and union donations in the system, and that is good for politics in this province. It means that as parties, we will have to go out and work to raise money at the local level with individuals who are residents of Nova Scotia. That's good for Nova Scotia. That's good for politics. It involves us having to be engaged, to go out and actually have a debate with Nova Scotians, Mr. Chair, to actually go out and talk to them. Part of fundraising is about convincing them to vote for you before you can ask for them for fundraising, in most cases. And I would argue, Mr. Chair, that that means it would force the political parties to be more grassroots, more involved in going out and talking and meeting with Nova Scotians, and having an opportunity, Mr. Chair, to do that, I think is important, and I think that's good for politics, and I think it's something we should be encouraging, and this legislation would encourage that. It's finance legislation, but in limiting or eliminating corporate and union donations, Mr. Chair, we would be putting ourselves in a position where it would force the parties to have to go out and be more grassroots. And if we need an example of that, look at what was the Reform Party, then the Canadian Alliance, now the Conservative Party of Canada. The reason why they banned corporate and union donations federally was not only because of philosophy, but because they, in the last 15 years, first as the Reform, then Canadian Alliance, now Conservative Party, have done a lot of work. Almost all their fundraising is done at the grassroots level. They've developed an extensive grassroots fundraising machine that has ensured that the vast majority of their donations, if not almost all, I guess it will be all now, are individual-based, are small numbers, but it's resulted in a large amount of money. But it also means if you can get these people to be donating, odds are they're supporters. And it ensures the parties are continuing to maintain a base that's grassroots-based and not top-heavy. And, Mr. Chair, I think that's good for political parties. And again, there's another reason. Political parties will benefit. Democracy can benefit from this as well. And I would argue that's the third reason, Mr. Chair. Anytime you can create a system that results in the political parties have to be more engaged, not in fundraising, not in trying to schmooze or raise money from large organizations, but dealing with individuals, convincing them to vote for them, and in return asking for funding as a part of that. Mr. Chair, I would argue that is good for democracy in this province. So it's about democracy, it's about enhancing the ability of our political parties to be effective representatives of the people, it's about harmonizing with the federal government, and yes, on a philosophical basis, it's the right thing to do. It was done in Quebec in 1976 when the Parti Québécois came into power. It was done in Manitoba, I believe, or at least limited, in the late 1990s. It's now done federally. We have enough examples. This province is not the first over the trench. We're not going to be the first ones to do this, Mr. Chair. This is something that we can do because others have accomplished it, and I argue that it has made their systems better. And in a province in which we have a checkered past with regard to how money has been raised, when we've had a checkered past as to how politicians have dealt with the public, with contempt at times, arguably, Mr. Chair, I think that this is the opportunity we have to show them that we are not beholden with regard to corporate union donations, that we believe that organizations do not have to be donating to political parties. We can do it with individual donations. It'll make us better as political parties. It'll be better for democracy. And for all those reasons, I would argue, philosophically, it is important that corporate and union donations be barred. I think that is what can be done, Mr. Chair, to ensure that Nova Scotians believe, even if it's just perception, and in most cases it is, if not all, Mr. Chair, that there is no beholden to large organizations. And let's be frank, in this House, In the 9 years I've been here, more than one occasion, the other political parties have raised the issue of our donations from trade unions and how they feel that has had undue influence on us, Mr. Chair. Yes, I know people may have that hard to believe at this day and age, but there's been a time in this House, and not that long ago, where we've been criticized for the amount of money we receive from trade unions. Mr. Chair, I stand here today to say this amendment, if passed, is the NDP's acknowledgement that we are willing and able to lay down and say, we don't need that money. And we argue if we don't need that money, then the other political parties should be prepared to put down and say, we don't need the corporate money as well. It's a way for all of us at the same time, if we agree to this amendment, to say, it's time to move on. Let's start working with individuals. They have corporate money, we have trade union money. Maybe it's a good idea if we just all decide at the same time, 1, 2, 3, agree, we'll no longer take this money. No one will benefit. No one will be significantly impaired. But what will happen, Mr. Chair, is that we'll have a system that Nova Scotians will feel more confident in.